Zack
It's just,
Kramer.
sorry.
We crushed that start. We're gonna go from here. Zack Kramer, welcome to the Process Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
How you doing today?
I'm doing good. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
It's 5 a.m. in the morning. You're sipping your coffee. You've agreed to
It is
this
5 a.m. in the morning, but
obnoxiously early time.
I'm always up for talking breathing. So
Awesome. Well, let's get
I'm
into that,
talking,
Zack. Let's get
I'm
into
talking to you about breathing first thing in the morning instead of my wife. So she's probably happy.
that. Tell me about yourself, Zack.
Yeah. So I live in Tennessee and owned a CrossFit gym for 6 years and kind of I'll probably get more into this, but basically through owning the CrossFit gym, started to dive into the world of breathing a little bit to bring it to my athletes and to myself, and kind of eventually moved away from having the gym and just started coaching people, especially athletes, with inside of their breathing primarily. So now I'm just coaching athletes and helping them with their breathing for performance.
When you say you're helping athletes with their breathing for performance, what does that mean?
Yeah, so there's breathing is kind of going a bit viral right now, and there's all sorts of coaches and things out there. What I try to hone in specifically on is kind of like the strengthening and conditioning piece more. So breathing affects athletes' mindsets a lot, and what I do will affect that, but I really try to hone in on physical performance, endurance, strength, those types of things. That's kind of what fires me up the most. So I focus on those things to help athletes perform better.
And you said you started as a gym owner, you transitioned into working with athletes primarily on breathing. What's your story there? What brought you to breathing?
What brother? Yeah. I mean, I was always an athlete and always liked exploring the training. I played football in college, and I think looking back, I enjoyed training during the off season, maybe even more than I enjoyed playing football. And so I was just always into that. And yeah, basically found CrossFit, started a CrossFit gym. And because I owned my own gym, I kind of had my own lab. You probably can relate to that a little bit, like having your own space where you can play around with things with yourself and then test them with some athletes. And basically, you've probably heard the name Wim Hof before. You heard of Wim Hof breathing?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I heard Wim Hof on a podcast while I owned the gym, and I tried out some Wim Hof breathing, and man, it was like a light bulb in my brain when I tried Wim Hof breathing for the first couple of times. And it was just kind of like, what is happening? Like, it really affected just how I felt, made me feel awesome, and just made me super curious, like what was going on that made me feel like this, made me be able to hold my breath for so long. And so I just started researching a little bit, ended up taking my first course, XPT. Have you ever heard of XPT with Laird Hamilton? He's a big
Yeah.
wave surfer. Yeah. So they started a group where they were doing a lot of breath work as part of their kind of like lifestyle fitness company. Took a course in that, took a course with Brian McKenzie's group at the time. And so I just started eating up all this stuff. I was super interested. And so the Wim Hof breathing kind of like opened my eyes to it all. But then honestly, Brian McKenzie's group kind of challenged me for the first time to do the nose breathing while I worked out. And when I did that, I committed to it for a whole month. Like I was doing CrossFit, hard CrossFit workouts. And I said, all right, I wasn't really competing anymore. So I said, I can, it's okay if I don't win the leaderboard every day. And I kind of just do this and see what happens. So I nasal breathed only for all the CrossFit workouts for a whole month. And at the end of the month, man, I just never looked back. Like I just felt so good after my workouts, and it really transformed how I thought about endurance training. And out of those two things, I started to bring it to the gym. I was like, I feel so good. This is affecting me so much. Of course, I've got to start, bringing it into the gym. I'm sure you do a similar thing, right? Like we were talking about cars earlier, like you find something that affects you so much, you start to bring it into the people you work with. And it just kept building like that to where I just really was excited about that. I saw where that was the thing that athletes weren't focusing on, that if they focused on it, made a huge difference. And so through becoming a little more online during COVID, like we all did, I just kind of developed this program and moved on to that.
Amazing. Okay, I've got two questions to ask you.
Yeah.
First question, and we'll talk about the Wim Hof experience. I'm probably going to say that, and I'm seeing that our journeys have been quite similar in the short time that we've known each other.
Yeah.
So I signed up to Wim Hof course, did his online course. This was
Oh,
probably
wow.
6-7 years ago.
Okay.
Wim Hof was like probably when he first went on Joe Rogan, when everyone started
Yeah.
talking
Yeah. Yeah.
about Wim Hof.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I committed to like the power breath protocol every morning for 3 months, and I had a
Wow.
black book where I would record my breath hold, and I would just track
Man.
over time, if there was correlations in like what was happening in my life.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
So
I
you're doing the
yeah,
just so you doing like the 30 breaths, exhale, hold 3 rounds of that or something every morning.
exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So I want to know what was your protocol? What were you doing with this breathing? And the profound effect that you felt in your life. What was that? What was that profound effect?
Yeah. I would say so. I never followed it. I did not follow it detailed like you did. I tried to do it in the morning, and I would do those 3 rounds, but I didn't like detail it or anything like that. I was just kind of doing it in the mornings when I woke up early enough to do it. Um, the profound effect for me was, I think I had been trying to meditate for a long time, and I've always been like, that's a whole nother discussion, but I've always been a pretty spiritual person. I went to seminary and all these things. So when I was trying to meditate, and then when I did Wim Hof, like all of a sudden, during that exhale hold, like it's all of a sudden like your brain just turns off. It's the easiest time I've ever felt to not think, if that makes sense. You can just really like sink into silence and be still. And so that really was, I think, what affected me. It was just like that feeling of total silence, total relaxation.
It was interesting. So when the times where I could really tap into a deep, very present state in the breath hold was always the times where my breath holds would be longest. If my
Yeah,
mind was occupied and I had like, thoughts coming and going, maybe
yeah,
I was just going through a slightly
absolutely.
stressful patch of life, my breath hold would be, sometimes like almost half of what
Hmm.
it would be on a day where I felt grounded and calm.
Yeah,
Crazy.
absolutely. So I just I just started doing, like, kind of adjusted my morning kind of breathing routine. I've been wanting to build my breath hold for a long time, and I just finally committed to it. And so I've been doing breath tables. I don't know if you ever heard of that or know what those are. So they've been around for a long time in the free diving community. I mean, free divers are really the ones who have been, they know all this, and we're all catching up to them basically. And so it's basically different ways of, there's two different types of tables. One, the breath hold gets longer and the time between the breath hold stays the same. The other one, the rest gets shorter and the breath hold stays the same. And where was I going with that? So those holds, though, aren't after, we can go into what's going on when you do Wim Hof breathing, but like those breath holds aren't after hyperventilation like they are in Wim Hof. So you're just breathing normally, take a big breath in and hold. And so it's a lot more challenging, I guess. And anyways, back to your point about like your thoughts and things like that, man, with doing these, it's like forces you to be super mindful, because as soon as a thought comes in, like it gets way harder. And so it's been really interesting, because I knew that before, but with these, they're so much more challenging. The breath holds are like so close to your maximum breath hold that you don't have an option to think. Like you have to be as still and not think in order to make it.
And I mean, is there any science on that? Is there any science on why an active mind prevents us from holding our breath
No.
longer?
It'd be interesting to see like a calorie
Yeah,
like burn on thoughts.
that's
Because
100% what I'm thinking, right? It's like
yeah,
my thoughts were that, a stressful, stress being the input and a
right,
busy mind being the outcome of a lot of stress
yeah,
input is like
hmm,
how much energy that is expending, per second when it's happening. And is
absolutely,
that what's correlating to the fact that, and obviously if you take the breath hold and you translate that to sport, and then in an aerobic sport like CrossFit, for example, the input of stress, how much that's going to affect you in your ability to perform in a breathing sport predominantly, then,
and I think the same goes for cross. Like I say, most people can probably relate to doing a Metcon where they're just totally in the zone. And they weren't thinking about anything else. They're just wall ball, wall ball, wall ball, burpee, burpee. And they had no thoughts. And all of a sudden the workout's over and they like smashed it. And then other workouts where they feel really ready for, and they're distracted or forgetting their reps. And all of a sudden the workout just feels like it's terrible and you're dying. It's crazy how much your mind has an effect on your energy output.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm gonna go to my second question now, just as a tangent, which was working with Brian McKenzie and the nasal breathing stuff. I've done a couple of podcasts now talking just about nasal breathing and its application to CrossFit. One with Kyle Ruth, who's one of the coaches at Training Think Tank, coached me for many years. He was the one who actually introduced me to the oxygen advantage. And I read that book, and then that led me to James Nestor's Breath, which I think is probably a lot more mainstream. A lot of people have read, and now those are the two books that really kind of kick-started me on my breath journey. And so
that was all after Wim Hof.
That was all after Wim Hof. Wim Hof was the first one, but it didn't give me the foundations and understanding of why I was doing it. I just did it because I thought this guy's
there's not much. It's like just do this.
Do it. And he just basically said, do it and you'll never get sick and you'll be able to do amazing things. And I was like, all right, well, let's give it a go.
Sign me up.
So Oxygen Advantage and James Nestor's book Breath, two really great books. That made me just conceptualize the understanding of breath work. And so I, very similar to you, went through an experiment of nasal breathing everything. Even to the point where I was minimizing how much I would talk on a daily basis.
Oh wow.
And if I didn't have to talk, I would like literally keep my mouth closed. I taped my mouth for 3 months at night and I did it simultaneously with a Whoop to basically see like what trends I would come out of it. So tell me about your experiment with nasal breathing. And actually, one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, the validity of nasal breathing in a sport like CrossFit, because I'd love to share my thoughts and what I experienced. But, hearing from you, for someone who's really dived deep into this, what are your thoughts and experiences?
Yeah. So one of my experience probably relates more to like the, I guess, common CrossFitter as far as like doing it for health and longevity. And that experience was that after workouts, like the light bulb moment, I guess, for me was that after a workout, I felt refreshed. I didn't feel just crushed. And so if I did nose breathing, and like I said, I wasn't a games competitor or anything, but I was still pushing it and I was still pretty fit, but I would nose breathe. And at the end of it, I felt like I had almost more energy and I was ready to go. If I had to coach a class or go home, do whatever I had to do, I still felt good. Whereas when I would mouth breathe and hit a workout like that, I was like on the ground and like you've got brain fog sometimes after you hit a workout like that. And so just realizing like, man, I just feel good after doing these instead of bad. Like that was the light bulb moment for me. Like, I'm just going to keep doing this because unless I've got to open my mouth, like why change this? I also think like, so maybe starting to transition a little bit into fitting into CrossFit. I think there's a lot of, there is a development period. Like at first you really cannot go very hard and you do develop the ability to go harder. So I think that's one part is like, I think people at first try it a lot of times, especially if they want to go hard and go fast and win the leaderboard. And they're like, well, I can't do anything hardly nose breathing, so forget it. There's an adjustment period. And now like it's funny now, I almost have to make the conscious decision to open my mouth. Like if I want to go faster, like I'll pretty much nose breathe until I'm like, all right, let's kick it into gear and I'll open my mouth. There was something else I'm going to say for people, but yeah, that's kind of how, I was going to say, you can, once you adjust, you can get your heart rate up higher. Like you can go faster, but it takes definitely an adjustment period. And that's, people have different nose issues and things too. So that's not ignoring everyone's complete nose issues, but I think most of us have deviated septums. I have a deviated septum, so you can still build a really strong ability to nose breathe even with a deviated septum.
So I think we've probably got to take this back a step for listeners, and what are the arguments for and the benefits of nasal breathing in general?
Yeah. So in general, man, that's a
Just a
big
loading
bucket of stuff. But let's say like just for let's stay with just like in workouts maybe. If we take it another step back, we can go into, if it's okay, go into carbon dioxide a little bit.
Do it.
So yeah, so like this is obviously huge in the book Breath and the Oxygen Advantage, talk a lot about carbon dioxide, but basically most people, everyone doing CrossFit has heard somebody say like, oh man, I need more air, I'm out of breath, or I need more oxygen when they're tired. But actually the fact of the matter is that when you're feeling like that, it's the buildup of carbon dioxide. So you can't get rid of the carbon dioxide fast enough, and that's what's making you feel like that. Well, if you build up a tolerance to greater amounts of carbon dioxide, then your overall endurance, your breathlessness will improve. So basically, if you nose breathe while you exercise, you hold on to more CO2 simply because you can't exhale as much. So I can dump a lot more carbon dioxide out my mouth than I can my nose. So if you exercise nose breathing, you hold on to a lot more carbon dioxide, you become more tolerant to carbon dioxide, and that will improve your overall endurance.
That's a very, very nicely put and very succinct way of explaining it. So I think the application of that, I think you're dead right. Why so many people can't commit to the concept of nasal breathing with endurance exercise, especially with CrossFit. CrossFit, especially because with so many different movements in the sport and each movement having a very different effect on things like respiratory rates, like, barbell cycling can suddenly spike your heart rate up, whereas like being on a rower, you can stabilize it.
Right.
And I think you're right. People don't, I think number one, maybe that's not the best environment to develop better levels of CO2 tolerance, right? So when you're exploring nasal breathing for the very first time, choosing like a single modality is going to be a much better way to start to build awareness and see the progress right over time, versus if you start going into thrusters and pull-ups or 150 wall balls, it's going to be, each of those just has a very unique dose response in the body. And I think that's where a lot of us go wrong. And that's what I've realized very quickly when I first started. I was like, I don't think, can't just jump into regular in-season programming and just expect to put nasal breathing into this and be effective, because I was thinking about the application of nasal breathing being something that was going to help me from a health perspective, but I was applying it to a performance-based area. So those two things are very counter, they were kind of just knocking each other's heads straight away.
I always tell people, just real quick to your point about the movements and stuff, like when I first work with people and I challenge them to do a month, one of the other things I immediately talk to them about is timing of the different movements and stuff of their breathing. Like, because if you don't have a strategy for when to inhale and when to exhale and you get your heart rate up, like you're just going to give it up. So you definitely have to have a strategy as far as like when you're breathing in, when you're breathing out, if you're going to switch to nasal breathing.
Yeah. And I love that you brought to light the fact that when you do start nasal breathing, your capacity will feel like it's come down significantly. Like there's not a time where you're going to be PRing things, but you need to the idea of that this is going to benefit you in the long term. And I do think that an argument a lot of people have around the concept of nasal breathing, why they are counter it, is the fact that they feel like they're developing their aerobic capacity by mouth breathing. So like it's a good thing to push your threshold so hard that you need to gasp for air, because that's how that's how you will develop CO2 tolerance, when really that's kind of like the same concept of fatigue-based training, isn't it? You've gone beyond your threshold there, where we're not making adaptations anymore, and therefore you're just kind of like going back into survival.
A good or super good illustration from I heard, I think he was talking about something else, but I thought it applied to this, was Andy Galpin, if you've heard him on different podcasts and stuff. But he used an analogy one time talking about like a boat that's dragging an anchor behind it. And so the boat's working on getting faster and faster and faster. But if it just dropped the anchor, then it'd go way faster. And that's what I think about nose breathing. Like with the carbon dioxide tolerance, like people are just pushing themselves harder and harder and harder. But if they just fix that, like this underlying issue, then they could, blast through their PRs. So it's sometimes you have to take a step back, like fix something, and then you can go a lot faster and harder.
Yeah, right. Otherwise, if you don't do that, then the only solution is just to go do more volume at more intensity, and that's
Right.
really hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Tell me about okay, airwaves, products, all these things that are coming to market now, like all these tools now that are supposed to like help us with breathing. What are your
Mhm.
thoughts on all of that? What's your general take on it?
Yeah, there are a bunch of products. I mean, I guess the first thing I'd always say is just that like there's a lot you can do without buying anything. Like you mentioned nose breathing, like that's one of the first steps I'm always going to tell people is work on nose breathing. Even if you want to still do some metcons mouth breathing, like just focusing on nose breathing throughout the day, nose breathing while you sleep is going to have a great impact on you. Breath holds are going to have a huge impact on building your tolerance. So there's lots of things that you can do uh without anything first. It's kind of like, you can do, if you've never exercised before, doing air squats and walking is great. You know, you can get into dumbbells and weight vests and echo bikes later, but, taking care of the first things first. But as far as the products go, yeah, I think a lot of them have, positive benefits to them if you're using them the way, like, obviously in my opinion, the way they should be used. So I know the airwave is like the big one in CrossFit right now. That's bringing the biggest awareness to breathing. And it's like surprising to me how I feel like CrossFit is behind a lot of sports in the breathing aspect. But airwave is like huge. So it's interesting to like kind of watch that all play out. I think one of the biggest things, and I have a few of the airwaves. One of the biggest things is I do like the mouth feel of it. I think there is something to like being able to clench down on it. It just feels good sometimes on different metcons. I would kind of like we were talking about earlier, the training versus competing piece of things. So the airwave is really designed. You could nose breathe with it, but it's really designed for mouth breathing. And so I see it as more of a competitive tool. So because it's going to force you to mouth breathe like that, you can't. It's harder to go up and down nose to mouth or what you needed to do.
Zach,
So that's
can I just interrupt you there real quick? Can you just talk us
yeah.
through what the concept behind the airwave mouth guard is? So people have probably seen it. It's like a mouth
Yeah,
guard that you slide into your top teeth. What is the
yeah.
concept?
It goes on your bottom teeth actually.
Oh, it goes in your bottom teeth. There you
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Didn't even know that.
There you go. Yeah, it
Tell,
goes on your
tell
bottom
us.
teeth. It goes on your bottom teeth, and basically, so it's all about your airway. So essentially, the idea is to open up your airway, like your throat, essentially, so that you can move air easier. So it pulls your jaw forward, which is something that's like super well known in sleep apnea studies and research. Is like if your jaw sinks back towards your throat, it collapses your airway and gives you sleep apnea. So basically the idea is to pull your jaw forward and then to pull your tongue down and forward. So that's like there's a bar on the like around the bottom of your teeth that your tongue kind of goes underneath or to. So it pulls your tongue out of the way, pulls your jaw forward, and that opens up your airway to breathe.
Right.
But when you nose breathe, so the reason I say it's more for mouth breathing, because it pulls your tongue down there. When you nose breathe, your tongue rests on the top of your mouth. Yeah. Yeah. So you can do that, but I think it's a little more difficult to nose breathe with it in. But yeah.
So can I want to bring this back to nose breathing because the airwave is kind of just the airwave is bringing us back to that. In terms of you work with some really high profile CrossFitters, right? People who are competing in the CrossFit games, as well as I'm sure just kind of regular folks who are just training for life and longevity.
Yeah. And I have like other athletes too, like swimmers and things.
So okay, let's stick with CrossFit for the moment.
Yeah.
What is your recommendation then with regards to training, even for the top performance? And I guess, like some form of ratio with how much time should we be spending nasal breathing and in what format should we be doing that? And then, when do we move to mouth breathing? There's some just general outlines.
Yeah. You said like 4 competitors, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like general programming is going to depend on kind of the time of the year as well. It will be a big piece of it. So, after competition season, we can move back to nose breathing where we're kind of a little more recovery mode, a little more rebuilding mode. So, I tend to have us focus more on nose breathing during those times. And then when I first begin working with somebody, though, depending again, like how far away they are out from competition, like if I start working with somebody right before competition, I'm not going to say, okay, commit to a month of nose breathing, because we're in a different stage at that point. But if they have time, I'll still want them to commit to some serious nose breathing, even if they're not doing it every day during the metcons. And we're going to add in more breath holds to build that tolerance to the CO2. And then eventually I build to where I'm just trying to help them. The other thing that nose breathing does is really helps you build an awareness of your breathing, because you have to be aware of your inhales, your exhales, when you're breathing, how out of breath you are. And so after kind of developing at least some awareness of nose breathing, whether or not you've committed to that month, then we kind of transition to more general awareness of, I guess, kind of like the zones, kind of like a heart rate zone, but the breathing helps you become really aware of that. So this is something else I got from Brian McKenzie's group, and I use a lot, are breathing gears. And so helping people understand, like, okay, I can nose breathe during this part of the workout, during this part I'm mouth breathing. You can kind of shift up and down between nose in, nose out, or nose in, mouth out, or mouth in, mouth out. And so, helping athletes then become aware of their breathing like that, they can begin to play with it inside of workouts. So like if it's a long 20-minute AMRAP or something, you get to where you can nose breathe for the first 12 minutes, and then you start to kick it up by mouth breathing. So you kind of play with all those factors. And then you can also play with factors like inside of a workout, like you mentioned earlier, the different modalities. Maybe I get to the barbell and then I'm not going to pay attention to my breathing as much. I'm going to mouth breathe. I'm going to focus more on like bracing with my breathing than like whether or not I'm breathing with my nose. I'm gonna get through the barbell, but then I've got 1,000-meter row every round. Here, I'm gonna start to pull back down, like maybe shift down a little bit to nose in, mouth out or something, and catch up, focus on my breathing during the row. And then I'm gonna let go of it again when I get back to the barbell. So you can, like, after developing awareness, after developing some of that CO2 tolerance, then you can begin playing around inside of workouts like that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that was one of the first applications that I found, almost from like a strategy pacing
Exactly.
side of CrossFit. It's like if you can, your breath is almost giving you signals as to where your heart rate might be at, where fatigue levels might be at. And that can, give a lot of confidence to an athlete. It can give them like security in knowing that the pacing plan they're on is a good one, or that they're in control of the workout. Yes. So I love that concept.
And without awareness like that, like you can see athletes who aren't paying attention to it at all, and they're in the middle of a workout and they're just breathing so erratically into their shoulders and mouth. And you see this a lot actually in fighting. Like fighters are attuned to watching their opponents breathing.
For sure.
So nose breathing is really growing in MMA. And because of that, like being able to focus, being able to pull down, like control your mind and know what's going on, but then also being able to watch your opponent and see them start to huff and puff, then it's like it gives them almost like a confidence boost, like, oh, he's done.
I mean, I'd say the same in CrossFit as well. Like if you're in a lane close enough to someone, or you're doing a running workout and you're passing someone, I'm always listening for breath, because it's going to be very indicative. If someone's coming up behind you and they're huffing and puffing and you're still nasal breathing, you're calm, that's a real boost of confidence to know, all right, I probably got it. But again, that only comes with awareness. If that awareness is you knowing that you not breathing at that level means that you probably have more in the tank than that other person.
Exactly.
Okay, you talked about, in the application to the competitive athlete, times of the year. I totally agree with that. An off season where you may be focusing a little bit more on recovery and regeneration, intensity and workouts are a little bit lower than you would be in competition season. Then, using nasal breathing a bit more in your aerobic training. Maybe if you're like going through an aerobic base building phase of training where you're doing generally like longer and slower bouts. I love it as an application to deloads as well. So like even in season, and you want to program a few days or a week where you want to pull intensity out of it, still program fun metcons, but have nasal breathing being a requirement. It massively pulls people back a bit. But then you also talked about breath holds. So what's the application to breath holds with your athletes? Is that in a workout, or is it like between sets? Is it just throughout the day? Like, what are you generally recommending with that?
Yeah, that's more based on a lot of the stuff I do is customized kind of to the individual athlete's daily routine. So a lot of the breath holds will be, yeah, maybe like a morning routine. I will add them in during like general warm-ups, like say 2 minutes on a bike or something. And every now and then breathing out, holding your breath for only like 2 to 4 seconds. And then doing a few rounds of that to build carbon dioxide beforehand. So one of the other aspects, and I keep meaning to bring back to like the respiratory, you asked about the pieces earlier, so I'm trying to remember the respiratory muscle stuff too, we'll talk about, but we keep talking about CO2, but oh, that's what I was, sorry, going to thinking about a lot of things all at the same time. The warm up for doing the breath holds on the bike or something like that, what that does is it increases your CO2. And another piece of the carbon dioxide tolerance discussion, which I know it's an oxygen advantage, I'm not sure it isn't breath, but is that you actually use your oxygen more efficiently if CO2 is higher. So increasing CO2 before a workout will actually help you use your oxygen and have more energy for the workout. So that's one piece I'll usually add in, is those breath holds before a workout.
Okay, so that would be like, you're on a stationary piece of equipment or just going through your general warm up, and it's not aggressive breath holds, but maybe just short little breath holds and then returning to regular breath. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
What was the test in Oxygen Advantage, which was a really simple test when you're
The bolt.
walking? That's right. The
So,
bolt score. Yeah.
so there's the bolt score, the one where you're walking, and the one where you're walking is one I use a lot. And yeah, anybody can try this. So you take a few breaths, like relax, make sure you're nice and relaxed, but then you just take a normal breath in, normal breath out, hold your breath. I always say to pinch your nose when you're testing it the first time, because people will cheat and not even realize it.
I cheese it.
So you breathe in, breathe out, hold your breath, and then walk as long as you can until you pop. And you just count your steps, and that's your score.
Right. Yeah. And so is it not until it feels uncomfortable? Because I remember basically holding my breath until the point where I was literally like blue in the face.
You hold your breath until you absolutely have to breathe. Yeah.
Okay.
But
Right.
you go for max steps.
That's right. Off the top of your head, do you remember what good scores were?
Yeah, so I use this test with every single one of my athletes when we start. So I'll say most people, when they first do it, get between 20 and 30 steps. The goal for general population, everybody, is 60. And the goal for athletes is, like, the first goal for athletes is 80. I try to get everybody to 100 though.
And these are regular steps. You can't shorten your steps to be tiny little piss.
Yeah, you can't shorten your steps. Some people try to run, or not run, but like walk quickly. But as long as it's the same, like obviously it's not going to be exactly perfect person to person, but as long as you're doing it the same during repeat tests. Yeah.
Okay, so Zach, I want you just one more time outline that test from start to finish.
Yeah.
What the scores are.
Yeah. So again, start by relaxing. Like, you don't want to do this after a workout or something. So make sure you're nice and relaxed. And then you just take a normal breath in, normal breath out. So not, people want to take like a huge breath, right, or something. Just normal in, normal out. It has to be after the exhale. Hold your breath, walk as far as you can until you absolutely have to take a breath, and just count your steps throughout that test, and your steps are your score.
And low scores being
below 60.
Below 60 is low score. Yeah, that blew my mind. I think I remember being around 20 or 30 and thinking that
most
I was going to crush the test.
Most people around 20, 30. And that's like, I work with Olympian swimmers, and like they'll be lower. They're higher than general population people, but it's still not 60 when they start. So,
and what that's saying is that your ability to tolerate CO2 is poor, not optimal.
Yeah, not optimal. Absolutely.
And the way that we get that up is actually by doing intentional nasal breathing work and breath holds.
Yeah.
Just simply slamming ourselves and doing more mouth breathing work isn't necessarily going to improve that.
No, definitely not.
Okay, I think that's a very important point that people hear, because I think
absolutely not help. Because again, and same thing with Wim Hof. Like, if you are focused on breathing out a lot of air, you're dumping carbon dioxide and you're not acclimating to higher amounts of it. So like for like full circle here, go back to Wim Hof stuff, like with the people I work with, like I don't let them do Wim Hof until they reach a certain score on that test. I want them to be at least above 60, if not 80, before we're doing Wim Hof, because if we're doing Wim Hof too much, then you're literally doing 90 breaths of dumping carbon dioxide, and essentially you're detraining your tolerance to CO2.
What I also found with the Wim Hof stuff was that because it's inducing a sympathetic response, is that you need to be mindful of when you're doing that stuff. Like if you're already going through a fairly stressful patch of life, and I just committed to it because I said, right, I'm going to do this for 3 months, no matter what's happening with life outside. That actually that protocol would ruin me even more and have a really negative effect on my day.
That's really fascinating. I haven't had that feedback before, so that's super. I mean, I understand completely what you're saying, but it's interesting to hear someone that had that happen.
Yeah. I guess it was just like when your resources are already really low, and then you do a really aggressive hyperventilating breath protocol. I can totally see why that might induce even more stress symptoms. We haven't talked at any point today, Zach, about chest breathing versus mouth breathing. A lot of our chest breathing versus belly breathing.
Yeah, that's where my brain jumped to earlier, and I was like, I realized I hadn't said anything about that yet.
Yeah, so take us on a journey with regards to that conversation.
Yeah, I kind of came into that, after all the kind of nose breathing stuff we've been discussing, and that's kind of where I have been more recently focusing on. I've been working with some Olympic lifters, which has made me think even more and more about bracing. So yeah, quick like 101 on diaphragmatic breathing, I guess. So basically your diaphragm, I think the one thing people don't realize is that your lungs don't do anything to get air in and out of them. So your diaphragm is the muscle right below your lungs, and it kind of separates your lungs from all your guts. And basically when your diaphragm contracts, it pulls down. I guess we're on video too. So like if you can see my hand, basically your diaphragm sits like a parachute, and when it pulls down to flatten out, it creates a vacuum above it, and that's what sucks the air into your lungs. And so when your diaphragm then relaxes back up, the air comes out of your lungs. So that's your inhale and exhale. Like there are other muscles obviously involved, but your diaphragm is the primary muscle involved. So it contracts and pulls down, that pulls air into your lungs, and when it relaxes and goes back up, the air comes out of your lungs. But it's not a muscle we train very much, and you can train it. Like I think that's the other unknown piece, or it's not unknown, but just people don't recognize it or use it, is the fact that you can actually train your diaphragm, and you can create hypertrophy, strength, power in your diaphragm like other muscles. And obviously if you can have more power, more endurance in your breathing, then you're going to breathe better when you're exercising. And there's a lot more involved in there too, but that's the general gist.
How does one know whether their diaphragm is strong and it's contributing to their breathing positively?
Yeah, one of the easiest things to do is just to see if you can even do it at all. So if you like lay down on the ground and put your feet flat on the floor, so you're in a nice comfortable position, and put a hand on your chest, hand on your belly, and just see how easy it is for you to breathe only moving the hand on your belly and not feeling any movement in your chest. Like that's kind of step one that I take people through, just because a lot of times people don't realize that they're not using their diaphragm at all. They're all just chest breathing and shoulder breathing. And a lot of that has to do with posture. So if we're sitting poorly throughout the day, we either, like if we're hunched over like we're on our cell phones or something, we kind of put a lot of weight on our diaphragm, and it makes it harder for it to function. And if we're hyperextended, puffing out our chest, our tailbone, kind of that cheerleader pose, if we're in that, then you really can't use your diaphragm. It's really hard. And what happens when you are in one of these poor postures and you're not using your diaphragm throughout the day, you start having to use your chest and your shoulders to open up that space again, because you have to open up space to get air in and out of your lungs. So if you're not using your diaphragm, your body's going to naturally use your shoulders or your chest, and use accessory muscles instead of its primary muscle to breathe.
And,
So
and
that's,
what,
yeah. So back to your question, step one is just make sure you can diaphragmatically breathe and just practice that and practice it sitting, standing throughout the day. See how hard that is.
and what is the issue with breathing through our chest, Zach?
Yeah. The few issues are just kind of really more on the injury prevention side of things. I like to think about it like every breath is a rep. So we breathe about 23,000 times every day. And basically, as you can imagine, like if we were doing 23,000 air squats and every single one was poor form, like our knees, our ankles, our back, there'd be all sorts of things breaking, right? Doing that many incorrectly. And it's really the same for our breathing. So if we, like a lot of times when we see people with chronic neck pain, chronic shoulder pain, things like that, a lot of that comes from the fact that every day they're breathing by lifting their shoulders and creating tension where there shouldn't be tension throughout the day. And then the flip side of that is, so we're strengthening the muscles that don't need to be being used. We're also not using the muscles that should be used. So we're not getting 23,000 reps that could go towards a stronger core. So your diaphragm's really your biggest, we always think about our abs, but your diaphragm's your biggest core muscle. And so if we're not using it, we're kind of getting weaker throughout our core, and that leads to low back pain, things like that. Because then we're stronger in our shoulders because we're using all these reps here, but then we're not using our core, which is going to lead to low back pain and just not being as stable.
Is there a point, Zach, where breathing rate and heart rate, once it elevates to a certain point, our body has to move towards the chest for breathing?
Yeah, at a certain point where we can no longer get rid of the amount of CO2 we need to, and we're taking those bigger breaths, your body's going to start to use other muscles. Like you're going to start using accessory muscles, just like any other exercise, right? Like we try to do too much weight on some sort of movement, like your body starts to just figure out how it can use your calf to do a bench press. Like you start using every muscle there is. And it's the same thing with breathing. So when we're breathing, huffing and puffing, and we need more air in, more air out, yeah, we'll start to use like the intercostal muscles around our ribs, our chest, our shoulders to get more space for our lungs. And that's totally normal. It's just, again, like we should be nose breathing throughout the day. Throughout the day, we need to make sure we're diaphragmatically breathing. And the same goes for even like on the rower or the echo bike. Like you can think about your posture there. Like we've all seen the person on the rower that's just completely hunched over as they're rowing. It's super hard to breathe like that. And the same thing goes, one I always talk about in CrossFit is like overhead carries. So if this is where some like cars and stuff come in, but like think about overhead carries. Like if we're super arched to get that bar overhead or the dumbbell, like that completely takes your diaphragm out of position. And if you're not able, like if you have enough mobility, you can keep your chest down and breathe well. But if you don't have the mobility to keep your chest down and breathe through your belly with something overhead, then all of a sudden, like it's almost like you're suffocating because you can't take a breath.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I think that, and then there are so many other positions in the sport of CrossFit, which is,
Right.
I think a lot of our conversation right now. Like you think about, every time your body moves into an arch position, when you're swinging on a bar or swinging on the rings, and if that's a place where you're trying to get your biggest inhale, then that's never probably going to work well for you.
Yeah.
I mean, similarly, like I always say to our athletes, is like something like a thruster, and you watch the best athletes performing thrust, especially the females who generally like move really well, and you see them taking this nice big breath overhead and locking out and sitting there, but that's not necessarily the best place for everyone to breathe. If you don't have, like you said, that optimal overhead or thoracic position, then that can actually be the worst place for you to try and get your breath.
Yeah.
And you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there.
No, absolutely. And that's why like we were having a whole discussion about mobility and stuff earlier before we hopped on. That's where all that stuff comes in, is like if you can't breathe in these positions, then we need to fix those positions. And so that's where I'll bring in some of the cars and the pails and rails to try to open up shoulders, open up hips, because those anatomy chains all tie into the diaphragm as well. And so if we can't, if our appendages are affecting us being able to breathe, we got to fix that too.
And it's funny because a lot of people's approach to improving their breathing in positions where they find it hard to breathe, where mobility is also an issue, they just think they just need to breathe more in that position and they'll build up the tolerance versus fixing the issue, which would then allow breathing to be better. Can
Yeah.
I can I ask that? Something I always think about, and I don't think I've ever actually investigated to find if this is actually valid or not, or there's research to support it. But if our body naturally moves into more of a chest breathing state when things like heart rate, breathing rate, those things get elevated, really when we move into that high heart rate, high breathing rate state, like we're in a higher stress response, right? Our body is more
Yes.
towards the sympathetic state. So if we're living life, let's say sat as a computer or just rolling around and we're breathing through the chest just because of
Yeah.
poor posture because we don't know how to breathe, then in my head, we are triggering a sympathetic response. So basically
Absolutely.
telling our brain that we're stressed out right now because my breathing is acting in a way that it does when it's stressed. And therefore we are compounding the issue of the stress. Is that something that you're nodding your head? So I feel like
That's 100% accurate. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Your diaphragm helps cue your vagus nerve as well. So it pulls you into that parasympathetic state. And it's the whole system's all connected. So your nose even will cue your diaphragm more than mouth breathing. So we can all, I mean, if you just look at two people, right? Like kind of like what you're saying, if you just look at one person whose chest isn't moving, their belly is barely moving when they breathe, or got their mouth closed, like you can just imagine seeing that person and they feel relaxed to you.
Yeah.
And then you see somebody sitting at their computer, right, with their mouth open and their chest is moving. You just see them being stressed out or unhealthy or sick or something, right? It's like seeing an animal breathing out of its mouth. It just doesn't look healthy or something like that. So you're 100% accurate. Yeah, it's like it's a two-way street. We can get stressed and we start breathing throughout our mouth and chest breathing, or we can breathe like that and tell ourselves that we're stressed.
Exactly. So something else I think about now is because I genuinely when I first read the Oxygen Advantage and breath, I basically just started trying to live life more nasal breathing. So just like as I'm walking along the streets, as I'm warming up, as I'm working out, if I don't have to talk, like I'm just going to nasal breathe as much as I possibly can. It became something I was very, very conscious of, which
Yeah.
now has become kind of automated. Like I know that
Yeah.
I was mouth breathing back then. I'd wake up every morning, my mouth would be really, really dry. And
Before you were mouth taping, you were waking up with your mouth dry.
yeah, with like insatiable quench for thirst every morning.
Yeah.
You have to down, and very telltale signs that you're probably mouth breathing.
Mouth breathing while you sleep. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I started taping my mouth, I did that for 3 months, and now I don't do it at all. It's somehow trained
You
myself.
acclimate and yep.
Exactly. And now I just tend to breathe through my nose. Where was I going with this? Where did I start? Where was my tangent? Where did that begin? Now I'm on a rabbit hole about taping my mouth. No,
I can go down a random other tangent with mouth tape if you want.
let's go. It'll come back to me.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, there for a while, it hasn't been trending, I feel like, lately, or I haven't seen people post it, but there for a little while, CrossFitters were like posting pictures with their mouth tape while they're doing workouts and stuff. But I was gonna say, like, I definitely prescribe mouth tape for people while they're sleeping. The easiest way to do it, a lot of people, it makes people like kind of uncomfortable. You can use just KT tape, like rock tape, and cut a slit in it, like down the middle, and that way you can put it around your mouth and you can open your mouth if you like feel claustrophobic, but the elastic will pull it closed. So that's my favorite way to recommend that. But to the working out part, like, I think you just have to focus on it and like not depend on tape. Because also I just feel like the tape is just over the top.
Yeah, and also
like,
I also want to point out when I was taping vertically, so that I could breathe through the sides of my mouth. So just because when I first heard about mouth taping, I just thought people were like duct taping their mouths, like they were held hostage, and I was thinking that's really quite dangerous. So just if anyone's listening to this, you think about doing it, go with
the tape you use, was it that like cloth tape, like the 3M cloth tape?
Yeah,
that's how I do it. Yeah, that's how I used to do it too. So, and then you can pop it apart real easy if you really, you could still pull it apart with your mouth if you really needed to.
Yeah. Well, listen, I thought your tangent was going to trigger where I was going on my thought, and it hasn't. So I haven't got it, but it's going to come back to me at some point.
Oh, sorry.
what are you focusing on right now with your own breathing? Like what in the world of breath work are you currently like really sinking your teeth into?
I'm doing definitely more of the respiratory muscular training, like actually training the diaphragm. I'm playing with around with that a lot more. Um, I I'm working a little bit with a company called well, the company's P and Medical, but they have a device called the Breather Fit, uh, which is basically resistance for your breathing. So it resists your inhale and your exhale, and you can ramp that up and do basically strength or endurance work for your diaphragm using that. So I'm doing that, and then finally, like I started doing these breath tables where my goal is a 7-minute breath hold. I don't know why, but I just want to be able to do it. I feel like I should be able to do it. I've done 5 minutes before, but that was with Wim Hof, like doing super ventilation versus like just sitting there and taking a breath and holding. And so I'm fascinated. I'm doing that for a few reasons. One, I just enjoy it. It makes me feel good. Two, I'm fascinated to see kind of in my own experience, like the effects of just breath hold training on my endurance and cardio capacity, because I've never, like, there's a lot of evidence that CO2 tolerance helps that, but I haven't seen as much on just like regular kind of like the way free divers do it, just training breath holding. So that's kind of what I'm playing with personally right now.
One of the questions I was going to ask you is where your max breath hold is. So 5 minutes is where you're currently at.
5 minutes, yeah. But that's kind of like in the world of breath holding, like that's kind of cheating, because you like, again, the reason you can hold your breath so long after doing Wim Hof breathing or basically hyperventilation is because you breathe off all that carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide is the trigger to breathe. So like when you feel the urge to breathe, like for the listeners, if they do that test and at the end they're like they don't understand yet what they're going to feel like at the end of that test, but at the end of the test, when they feel super stressed out and their eyes are watering, that's all because of the buildup of carbon dioxide that's triggering them to breathe. So if you breathe off all the CO2, you can hold your breath a super long time. And so that's what I did before my 5 minutes. So I'm trying to build past that without doing that prior kind of offloading of carbon dioxide.
I mean, just this conversation has re-sparked my interest in breath work and is making me want to get back to incorporating more protocols into my life. And on that note, I've just remembered where my tangent was going.
Okay.
Where my tangent was going was, okay, I know exactly where I was. When I started playing around with just nasal breathing in general life, I started to genuinely feel just a lot healthier. Like I feel like my sleep quality improved like really quickly. I feel like, I don't know if it's a placebo just because I was like going all in it, but I felt like joint pain reduced. I felt like performance improved. I felt like recovery improved. I've just really genuinely felt in the same way that like cars, we were talking about this before the podcast, had a really profound impact on my life and the way that I felt. Nasal breathing also had a really profound impact on life. And I think two areas that I really notice now that make me feel not so good. Number one is when I talk a lot.
Yep.
So even after a podcast, I get towards the end of the podcast, my mouth is already getting pretty dry. And I just generally feel tired. And the exhaustion is also partly linked to the fact that when we're talking all the time, a lot of our breathing does move to the chest. I know I am definitely quite like I do definitely speak a lot from my chest, and that's actually something I want to start investigating and see if I can improve that. So number one, when I talk a lot, I feel higher levels of fatigue and generally feel further on the poor end of health. And number two, whenever I get a stuffed nose, let's say I'm like getting early signs of a cold and I get nasal congestion, the thing that
makes you way angrier.
Yeah, but the thing I genuinely think is making me feel shit is actually the fact that I'm breathing through my mouth. Less about like the sinus infection and a slight cold, but it's actually when I feel worse is when I wake up in the morning having had to breathe the entire night through my mouth. That's actually when I feel awful. And I get to a point now where I'm actually angry when I have to breathe through my mouth, because I'm like, this is messing up my life. What, like, have you thought of the things?
No, I'm just relating because like if I can't breathe through my nose now, I'm just like, it just throws me off. So I'm kind of working on like accepting that sometimes you can't breathe through your nose. um yeah, we all, our whole family went through colds recently, and so I'm just coming off of that frustration, so it's hot on my mind. The only thing I do is I, like, as far as combating that, like when I get congestion, is this is a thing that they talk about in the oxygen advantage, but like I will try like some small breath holds. Like I'll exhale real small breath holds, and that will help clear your nose up a little bit. But if you have a serious sinus infection, like there's not a lot you can do other than ride it out. I forget what the rest of your question was. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, was there not another thing where it was like a pinch your nose?
That's the I'm talking about. Yeah,
That's the one.
It's small breath holds. He usually adds in that pinching your nose just to make sure people are holding their breath. But yeah, real small breath holds, and basically when you nose breathe, it helps release more nitric oxide. And so nitric oxide is, like, in the world of strength and conditioning, I don't know if you ever took Inno Explode.
Oh,
but
yeah. Way too much of it.
Yeah. Oh man, way too much when I was like 16.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically nitric oxide is the chemical that's in some pre-workouts, and it helps open up your it's a vasodilator, right? It helps open up your blood vessels. And so your nose actually releases nitric oxide when you use it. And something's crazy is if you hum, you release, like, I'm gonna mess up the percentage, but it's something like 16 times the amount of nitric oxide. So if you want to be real weird, you can like hum during your pre-workout, and you'll have a bunch of nitric oxide for your workout. But anyways, that helps open up your nose. So if you're stuffy, if you hum or nose breathe, it'll help open things up.
It actually genuinely works, kind of temporarily. It doesn't unclog you, but it gives you like a temporary,
a moment of respite.
Yeah, exactly. Zach, what is something on your breathwork journey that currently eludes you, or like what's driving you to keep on digging deeper? Is there anything?
Yeah, I think it's more probably like the nerdy side of things. I mean, I'm personally trying to like always push myself to try more like with the breath holds, things like that. But as far as the coaching side of things, I think it's just the nerdy aspect of like, we're just getting started in all of this. And I think at the same time, we're just getting started, but it's fascinating because people have been doing and training their breathing for thousands of years. Like a lot of the stuff that's coming out today, like, has been around since BC times. And we're just now getting around to studying these things and measuring them. And so I think a lot of that aspect, especially in the strength conditioning world, like in the health world and the sickness world, there are immense amount of studies for respiratory muscular training or CO2 or all this stuff for people with illness. And we're just now starting to apply it to strength and conditioning. So there's not even like, I mean, we're all kind of tinkering and testing right now. So it's just exciting to be kind of in that world right now of trying to bring it to more people, seeing what works, seeing what new protocols help different sports, fitting it into new sports, applying it to, that's one of my favorite things is, you know, I'll get an athlete that plays a sport I don't know much about and thinking through, okay, what's involved in this sport? What's the, you know, is it more interval based? What movements do they have to go through? Like, what do I need to figure out that they need to be able to do to increase their breathing to help them with the sport? So that's always fun.
Yeah, I love that. I'm very much in the same boat, probably less on the breathing side, but yeah, I just love that, the concept of a sport, understanding what the sport requires and how can I apply what I know to that sport.
Right. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your company, Trinity Strength, and how can people work with you specifically on breath work?
Absolutely. So I do general strength conditioning with Trinity Strength, but I'd say the vast majority of people it's transitioning much more into the breath focused area. So basically I kind of have like two groups. One where I'm writing all their strength conditioning, and there's a lot of breathing involved in that, depending on their sport. So these are individualized, customized one-on-one programs. And then, but a lot of people now I have are coming in where they've got their own training. So like, it's like somebody, I was actually checking out your programming, thinking about it ahead of time. Like somebody comes in and they're following your programming, or they're playing a different sport and they have their own programming, and then they're giving that to me and giving me their daily schedule. and I take them through a breath consultation, and then I fit into their day and their program kind of the breathing that they need to be training and working on. So it's matched to what they need. And then on my website, so my website's trinitystrength.org. And so you can reach out to me there. You can reach out to me on Instagram, which is at athlete breath coach. And there's a lot of resources on there as well you can check out, but that's one way to get the conversation started. And then there's also on the website just like a general 6-week like plan that you can sign up and just go through on your own without any customization.
Yeah, I saw that. You have it's a free course. I think that's really cool that you put that out there. And I would recommend everyone after listening to this, go over on Zack on your profile, your link in bio, click on that, download the free course.
There are a bunch of free resources. I don't want to leave you. The 6-week breath course is not free.
Okay, the 6 week. Okay, there is a free course.
There's a bunch of free stuff on there. Yeah.
Awesome. Zack, we have a bit of a tradition on this podcast, which is we ask our guest to describe the perfect day. So, okay, what would be your perfect day?
My perfect day. I honestly, I love almost all the stuff I'm doing right now. I'd say my perfect day, this might sound kind of corny or cheesy, but it's just a day where I've actually, like I'm only doing the thing I'm doing. So when I'm fully invested in whether I'm working, like working on programs for somebody, or I'm working out, or I'm with my kids, or whatever I'm doing, I'm actually just there all in, versus like, the worst part is when I'm working and distracted thinking about something else, or if I'm with my kids and I'm thinking about work ideas. So the perfect day for me is just when I'm actually being present in each thing I'm actually doing and fully involved in that, and can separate out my brain.
I love that. And I also love that your perfect day is, like you said, what you're doing right now.
Because yeah, as long as I can manage it all.
Zack, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for
thanks so much for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all that you know. I love that listeners can reach out to you and work with you remotely. I'm looking forward to seeing how your journey unfolds, and all the athletes that you're helping at the top of their sports, and just all the people you're helping in general. Like, our conversation has genuinely inspired me to get back after breath work and prioritize it a little bit more in my life. So thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.